Hello, good morning again. Today, our guest is the eminent Professor Michael Heumer, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Progressive Myths. Hello, Michael, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yes, I promoted your book on a podcast. I am one of the panel members of this podcast. We meet on Mondays, and I discussed your book some time ago. These are the other books I promoted, one by Bruce Gilly and one by Jean Claude Escalante. Jean Claude Escalante is from Trinidad. He lives and writes in Trinidad, and Bruce Gilly is a professor. The case for colonialism and from indentureship to entrepreneurship, the rise of the East Indian peasantry in Trinidad. So, we're going to be talking about the most explosive myths in the book, not all of them. And this is the first myth we're going to discuss, the gender pay gap. Why do men earn more than women?
Yeah, so the basic reason is that men prioritize money more than women do. It's more important to a man to maximize his income, right? And so therefore, they're willing to do the things that you have to do to get more money. Okay, so like they're willing to work longer hours, or they will deliberately choose a profession that is higher paid, or they will choose a subspecialty within the profession that's higher paid. Okay, so like if you're a medical professional, like men are more likely to want to be surgeons because that's highly paid. Women are more likely to be pediatricians, which is lower paid. And the reason for that, it's not sexism, it's that it's just more important to the man to get more money, right? Which may be partly because the men are trying to impress women. Okay,
Yes,
I
women
don't
like
have
rich
to
men.
proving that, but that's just my speculation.
No, well, that has been proven before. There is a paper published in one of the journals affiliated to Wiley saying that women prefer to date men who are employed in stereotypically male professions because stereotypically male professions earn more. So if you are a surgeon, that suggests that you're richer than a pediatrician because pediatricians are usually women and pediatricians earn a lot of money, but they earn less than surgeons. So women prefer richer men and men who are employed in masculine professions. So
Yeah.
yes, men want to impress women, and that's okay.
Yeah. And like I mean, I don't know that these professions are particularly masculine or whatever, but that if something
Well,
is
not
male
those
dominated,
specific professions, but the idea that an engineer will earn more than a secretary, and most engineers are men again for different reasons.
yeah, yeah. So, um, like there are these various things that you could do. Like, say your company wants you to move to another location. Well, it's more likely that the male employee will do that, and then he'll get paid more money. Or another thing is hazard pay. Like, there's a dangerous job. Who's going to do it? It's going to be done by men because men are
Exactly.
more willing to do more to get money, right? So like, you know, um, lumberjacks, like that's the most dangerous legal profession, and it's something like 95% men, right? So, and like you hear about how like the top jobs are male dominated, like being a U.S. senator or being a CEO. Okay, that's male dominated, but also like the most dangerous jobs are male dominated, and generally speaking, the worst jobs are male dominated. Right, but that's all explained by this common factor that men are prioritizing money, so they're more willing to do things like risking their life to get money.
Exactly. Feminists, they never complain that the US Small Business Administration has an office that promotes women owned businesses. They never complain about those policies. They never complain that Google and other companies have initiative to promote women in STEM.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like, so of course, the job of the feminist isn't to promote. Well, it's not really to promote equality; it's to promote women. So, if there's a respect in which women are advantaged over men, they're not going to complain about that, right? So, like, there are these, there are programs to help women, like women-owned businesses, like you mentioned, like the Small Business Administration of the U.S. government has an office to help women businesses. It doesn't have an office to help male businesses, and so that gives an advantage to women. That's it's not. There's no parallel for men.
Exactly my point, and I like that you're honest. Feminism is rent seeking for upper middle class white women, and that's okay. Just don't pretend that you're interested in promoting equality when it's really a power grab.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not not really sure it's okay. Like
Yeah, rent seeking
we
is
should
not okay, but
we
it's
should not have
okay.
rent seeking. Yeah.
I agree, but if you're a rent seeker, it's okay based on your objective. So if you want renewable energy subsidies, then you're doing something that benefits your industry. Obviously, we're going to pay for it, but if you're interested in being a rent seeker, just say so. I understand why you're doing it. Don't pretend that you care about equality when you don't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it may be that you have to have some amount of deception in order to be successful, right? If you're a rent seeker, you got to pretend that you're helping society. Otherwise, other people are not going to give in to your plan.
So feminists are always talking about rape and sexual harassment, but they never comment on cases of women who sleep with their students and get voluntary service. And such cases do exist. They never complain about those cases. But if a
Yeah,
man sleeps with a co-worker at work and it's consensual and she ends the relationship, that's a problem. Feminists care about that. It's improper, it's a big issue. But they don't care
yeah,
about women who abuse boys. And many of them in the West don't care about women in India or the Middle East who are raped. They don't comment on those issues.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that last thing you mentioned is sort of a special case for people on the left. People on the left have um, they have a problem about Islam. Like they don't know how to deal with it because like the Islamic world has so much sexism and misogyny that that feminists should be complaining about, but they don't want to because they don't want to be Islamophobic, right? Because the left has decided that Islam is part of their side or whatever, that the Muslims are on their side, which they're absolutely not, right? Muslims are absolutely not with the left, but the left is with them, right? So they don't want to criticize Islam, but man, like if you really if your point is to promote the rights of women, really like job number one should be stopping the prejudice in the Islamic world.
I agree. But why would leftists assume that Islam is compatible with liberal values? Islam is a conservative religion.
Yeah, like it's pretty close to the opposite of liberalism, right?
Exactly.
It's like like um they murder gay people just for being gay. Like the women are totally oppressed. Like in some Islamic countries, women who are raped get murdered because they were raped, like as punishment for being victimized. So this is like, and there's like promotion of violence on behalf of the faith. Not like all Muslims are doing this, but like it's like surprisingly common in Muslim countries to support terrorism and such. So yeah, it's pretty much the opposite of liberalism. But the thing is that I don't think the contemporary American leftists, like, their top priority isn't really promoting liberal values. Their top priority is really attacking the West. So like the Islamic extremists hate the West and the left hates the West, and that's the most important thing to them. As long as you hate the West, we're with you.
I usually wonder when people say end Western civilization or end whiteness, what are they selling? What's the message? Because when I hear the term Western civilization, I think about human rights. The Human Rights Project is a Western secular project and a Western Christian project. Those are the two groups of people who are battling for primacy. Christians do say, oh, okay, human rights, that's our projects, and enlightened secular thinkers do say, no, we invented human rights. This is not a Muslim issue. Interestingly, when Muslims aim to make the case for Islamic freedom or Islamic liberalism, they're bashed by other Muslims.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of extremism in the Islamic world, right? Um, yeah, I mean, yeah. When I think about Western civilization, I think about these things like democracy and individual rights and the rule of law, right? And the things that have made our society prosperous and free and happy, right? But when the leftists think about Western civilization, they think about, oh, it's all about slavery and oppression and injustice. And why do they think this? Well, partly because they haven't looked at the rest of the world. Like they have, they have a very kind of egocentric perspective. They haven't looked at all the slavery in human history and all of the oppression in human history. Right. So like, when you read about the oppression in the past of our society, like, you might think, oh wow, it's really bad, but like it's hard to imagine that actually that was super good compared to the rest of human history. It's hard to imagine that. No, actually, like they had even worse practices. They treat their slaves even worse in most other societies. And
No, no, no. In the commentary on Islamic slavery, well, it's not a running joke, but a running thread is that many of the slaves who were held in the Islamic world died for several reasons. However, unlike Western slavery, we don't have sufficient commentary on Islamic slavery. So, Western planters and abolitionists, they wrote on Western slavery. We don't have comparable studies on Islamic slavery, but the anecdotal evidence suggests that many of their slaves died. The mortality rates were high, and the men, they were castrated.
yeah, and of course, like among the people, like the people who are dying is only the worst outcome, right? And like there are probably many other people who are just like horribly abused and and injured, but they survived, right? And so it's just that's only part of the suffering.
So, Michael, do we value female work less than male work, or should I just say stereotypically female work then?
Oh, I don't think so. You know, so after I published this in like a online, I talked about the how the gender pay gap was a myth. Um, some people commented, "Oh, well, what about these resume studies where they?" So the study is you send out a bunch of resumes and they're identical except you change the name. So, like, send one version of the resume to a bunch of companies with a male name, then another version with a female name. Okay, and the people who are commenting were under the impression that those studies show sexism. In fact, they don't. They do show racial bias. They show that if you have a stereotypically black name, you're less likely to get called back. It's not dramatic. It's like 2 percentage points difference, but there is a difference that's against the black names. But they don't show anything like that about female names, right? So the females might even have a slight advantage, or there's either no difference or slight advantage for females, right? And it can vary with the profession, right? But there's no overall advantage for males. So there just isn't really any evidence of a preference for males over females among employers.
There is evidence that employers who engage in racism face a financial penalty, and there's also evidence that employers are discriminating against black sounding names due to class issues rather than race issues. So if your name is Shaquisha, that could indicate that you're from a lower socioeconomic status, and and a low socioeconomic status is correlated with certain social defects, early teenage pregnancy, lower grades in school. So
Yeah.
the class discrimination could be justified to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, so, there's like a philosophical question of whether we should worry about class discrimination, right? Because you might think, oh, it's not my fault that I was born into a lower class, right? But on the other hand, you might think, well, but it's not the employer's fault either. And if, as a matter of fact, you're a higher risk to the employer, like, well, why should they sacrifice? Why should they take an unnecessary risk, right?
So again, recently a study was floated around the internet saying that women are better interviewees than men because men published more articles than women, but women were more likely to be employed. The probable explanation is that employers have a preference for women because of DEI policies. I don't agree with the explanation that women are better at interviewing because
Well,
studies also show that men are overconfident and they're likely to negotiate higher salaries.
yes.
So that if the study had said that men were employed despite publishing less studies, the researchers would argue that employers are discriminating against
Yes.
women in favor
Well,
of men.
yeah.
But the study said that women were being employed despite disparity in publication.
Yeah.
And the researchers concluded that women are better at interviewing.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
didn't. That's a dumb conclusion.
yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So, yeah, these are two interpretations, right? Women are better at interviewing, or interviewers are prejudiced in favor of women. Well, it's not, the difference between those is not so clear, right? Those might be the same thing, because what does it mean to be good at interviewing? Well, it sort of means to get the interviewer to like you.
Yes.
And so women are better at getting interviewers to like them. And that's kind of the same as interviewers just have a preference for women.
But if women are better at getting interviewers to like them, okay, that's your conclusion, that's your argument. But if
Yeah.
the study had concluded that men are better at getting interviewers to like them, that would have been seen as sexism.
Well, yes, it is sexism, like, but either way, right?
Yes, yes,
Psychological studies find that people like women more than they like men
of
on
course.
average, which is consistent with my personal experience. That's anecdotal, but what there are studies that support this. And
Women are
so,
wonderful effect. That's what you call it in your book. Women
yeah,
are wonderful.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, that's what they call it. And this comes out on both explicit and implicit measures. So the explicit measures are, you just ask people how they feel about women as a group and men as a group, and they have more positive attitudes about women. And the implicit measures are basically reaction time experiments that show that people have an easier time forming positive associations with women and with men. And if this were the other way, then the left would have no trouble concluding that it was sexism, right? If the preference went the other way.
What about professional unmarried women? Do they out earn men?
So if you just look at never married people without children who are working full time, the women get something like 14% more than the men, right? And it's weird, like if you wanted to explain the pay gap in terms of the patriarchy, it's weird that the patriarchy would favor exactly the women who are most defying the gender stereotypes, right? Which should be, the never married, childless, full time workers. Right. So probably there might in fact be a pro female bias among employers. It might actually be that for the same work, women get paid more.
I agree. And some studies suggest that certain groups of Asian women now earn more than white men. While
Yeah.
maybe they're more educated, that's not an automatic indication of discrimination or bias, but
Yeah.
people only accept the argument of sexism when men are being discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like depending on which group is favored, we get different explanations, right? From the left, if white males are favored, then it's prejudice. But if some minority group or women are favored, well, it's probably just because they deserve it. So like the Asian women are favored, it's probably they're just doing a better job. But when white men are favored, they never say, "Oh, they're just doing a better job."
Do you know what I would love for a mainstream academic to study? And I deliberately said mainstream, not somebody on the fringe or a writer who's not an academic. I want a mainstream person to study this issue because sometimes anecdotes can tell us about reality. And based on what I have read, both anecdotally and scientifically, there is no evidence for this argument. Whatever a man can do, a woman can do and do it better. Not true. And I know, let me tell you why I'm saying so. Recently, I read a paper by Guy Madison. I don't remember the name of his co-author. His co-author name is no, is European, so I won't bother to mispronounce the name. But they said that elite researchers are more likely to be productive male, not an unusual finding. Men patent more than women. Men work longer hours, and in the beauty industry, so for example, fashion, women consume fashion, but the most eminent fashion executives and designers are men.
Hmm.
Influencers, the biggest beauty influencers are men, like Jeffree Star, although he dresses like a woman. So I would love to see a study either proving or disproving that argument, that whatever a man can do, a woman can do and do it better. Because based on what I've read, anecdotally and scientifically, whatever a woman can do, a man can do and do it better. Because look at fashion, they consume fashion, they love it. But we know Ralph Lauren, we know most of the eminent fashion designers were men. There are some women, but the men are more prominent.
Yeah, so that slogan, whatever a man can do, a woman can do. There's two ways of interpreting that, right? One is every job that some men can do, there's at least one woman who can do. I think that's true, unless the job is like inherently tied to your sex, like sperm donor or something. But,
Okay.
okay, but leaving that aside, it's true. The other interpretation is, you know what, the ability distributions are exactly the same. Like, the average level of ability is exactly the same. False,
Not at
obviously.
all. Not,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
like
And do you know another myth that should be debunked? And this myth, I doubt that it was ever studied. If I'm yet to see a study on the topic, and I'm always searching for studies because that's what I do. I'm a podcaster. Black women work twice as hard as other people. That concept is highly flawed. It does not it doesn't appear to be highly flawed. It is highly flawed.
yeah. What? So,
You can
so I
give your
don't.
you can give your explanation, then I'll give my explanation.
I mean, I don't know how you would measure that working hard. So you could measure in terms of hours worked. I would just be very surprised if that came out to be true, if you had an objective measure of how hard people work, right? Or you could like have people doing the same job and then see who gets more work done, right? And then you need some like objective measure of how much work people get done. I just say I would be very surprised if there was objective evidence for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. People say to make groups feel good about themselves. It's a confidence boosting strategy, but it's
Yeah,
not consistent with real world experience. And we hear it all the time. As a black
yeah,
woman, I work twice as hard, and I'm like, look, and what I've seen scientifically is that there are group differences in productivity, and these group differences do not favor blacks. And secondly, I interviewed a distinguished professor some time ago. I won't call his name, and he said he had a job in the 90s and he worked really hard, and I believe him because he's a policy expert. And some of the women, they were basically being paid just to spout nonsense, and they were paid out of money. They were paid more than that professor.
yeah.
And,
Well,
and
like,
what do black women study? Many of blacks are underrepresented in STEM and finance.
yeah,
Georgetown does studies in that many black students were majoring in non-lucrative subjects. And
yeah,
there's a correlation between what you study and income and also productivity. Some subjects promote productivity more than others. So based on the evidence that's available to us, no, black women are not working twice as hard. And
yeah,
I can say that because I'm black. You shouldn't, but I will. You don't have to.
yeah, yeah. Well, like, yeah, if you want to figure out, okay, so black people earn less money in America than white people on average. What do we do about that? And the left's answer is, oh, well, that has to be the fault of white people. White people need to fix that by like affirmative action and like just giving black people more money for being black, right? But no, I don't like. I think that black people have to fix that,
I
right? Like,
agree.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're like, well, you have to decide like whether to finish school, whether to go to college. You have to decide what to major in. Like, how about we advise the black people like what to do to make more money, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I know.
Go to
No,
college.
I believe in 150%. So
Yeah.
what? What if you want to earn? What should you do? One, acquire a useful skill like coding. You can code. You can
Yeah.
study physics and then go and work in private equity.
Yeah.
Acquire a useful skill. That's the first thing that you should do. If
Yeah.
you're interested in relationships, get married to the right person and raise your children properly.
Yeah.
And
So,
lastly, copy people who are rich. So
yeah.
I have parents. I am close to my parents. I'm really close to my mom and dad. But men have a specific role in the family. So men, they're strategic. They should teach their children how to make money and how to acquire human capital. Women are good at nurturing. So my mother is a nurturer. She's a good person. And
Yeah.
I have more political discussions with my dad because men have a different role. And my father, when I was a toddler, he told me that Jews are successful. They tend to do better than other people. And he said, Jews, they save a lot and they understand money. And I said, okay. I listened to him and I developed an interest in studying successful groups. So if we want to help black people, we should teach them how to work hard and how to not just admire, but to appropriate and deliver.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
dad did not say, oh, Jews are rich because they're capitalists, they're scumbags. No, he said, the Jews are rich and I admire what they teach their children. My dad also, I was online and somebody said, when families don't eat together, that's an element of a recessive gene. Now the person was just being provocative. But my own dad, he has told me on a number of occasions that he worked for a wealthy white family in Jamaica, and the family this family they were always eating together. And he said, "Wow, I admire how this family operates. All families should operate like that family, and I just admire the family." And they were white, and he said, "Wow." I admire white people because a lot of white families they eat together. So when you're watching white television, Jamaica, like other Caribbean countries, are exposed to Western culture. So our TV shows are American shows. And when you're watching white TV, you see white families eating together. And you said, wow, that's good. I admire white
Yeah.
families. So yes, black parents should raise their children better in the story.
Yeah. 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 I guess I would rephrase the, admire white families. So I just, I admire families that are functioning
Yeah.
well,
But the point is that my dad is not racist. He's
Yeah.
obviously aware that some groups have traits that are really positive, more positive
Yes.
than other groups, and we should admire them.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. So, you mentioned how the Jews are more successful than most minorities. And that's basically because, well, they have a culture that emphasizes um, learning and success. And it's not, they didn't set themselves against the dominant culture, right? The Jews have been subject to a huge amount of prejudice throughout history, yet they've still succeeded.
Exactly.
They didn't decide that they hate the dominant culture and that they're going to go against it. They decided that they are going to work within the rules of society and do what it takes to succeed, right? And what the American left is teaching today is kind of the opposite of that, right? They're teaching grievance. So they're teaching that, like, if things are going badly for you, it's the fault of society. You should blame society and you should blame other groups. And that's just like a recipe for failure, right? If things are going badly for you, what you should do is focus on what you can do, not like how it's other people's fault, because
Jews have,
that's the only way that it's going to get better.
on average, Jews have higher IQs, higher verbal ability, and a socially effective personality. Verbal ability is really important. And funnily, the Jews who settled in Jamaica, they were Sephardim Jews, but
So far, yeah.
yes, they were not Ashkenazi.
Mhm.
But these Jews are still influential in business and media.
Yes.
There's one particular family, the Ashenaim family. I think that family is Ashkenazi. Hold on for a second. Let me see if I'm getting it right.
Yeah.
Ash- yes, Ashkenazi. Yes, I think the Ashenaims in Jamaica, they're Ashkenazi, but most of our Jews are Sephardim Jews, and they're still successful. So this suggests that it's more than just IQ; it's also verbal ability, and what Dunkel calls a socially effective personality. I also like that the Jews are really organized. So every now and then when I check my email, I subscribe to conservative publications.
Yeah.
I'm always getting these emails about Jewish programs for Jewish teenagers and Jewish people. They're really organized.
Yeah.
Are you
Uh,
Jewish, Michael?
what?
Are you Jewish?
No. Um, I'm part Chinese, part French, German, and Italian.
Oh, you're part Chinese.
Right?
Oh, who
Yeah.
are you Chinese?
Yeah. Yeah. Half Chinese. My mother was Chinese.
Oh, your mother was Chinese.
Yeah.
What? Oh, she passed?
Sorry.
You said she was Chinese.
Oh yeah. She's still Chinese.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Your mother was, yeah, because you said it
Yeah,
so
but yeah.
and
So and like the Asians are another example of a successful minority, right? So they came to America, and like all minorities, they were subject to prejudice,
yes,
but nevertheless, they succeeded, partly because they didn't blame other people. They just thought about what they can do to
yes,
succeed, right? And they have an emphasis on, learning and working hard.
yes. Like there's a story of Jewish fathers preferring their daughters to marry smart men with potential rather than dumb rich men. The son-in-law story, which is
Yes.
a real anecdote. It's not just a story; it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just a story; it's true. But back to your book on myths. So this is the other myth: women on college campuses. 25% of them are victims of rape. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
Amazing,
true?
right? Yeah. If that was true, like, yeah, if you believe that, you should make
No,
sure
if
your
I
daughters
believed
go.
it, no, I
Yeah.
didn't believe it. Let me tell you why.
No.
Because college
Yeah.
people are more educated than average, and IQ is not correlated with antisocial behavior. So
Yeah. No.
if you believe that, you are an idiot.
Yeah. Well, I was going to finish the sentence. If you believe that, you better not send your kids to college, right? You make sure that your daughter doesn't go to college.
Or
But the
leave them
fact
host
that,
because if 25% of college women are raped and college men should be smart, then the percentage of women who are raped outside of college will be higher, substantially higher.
yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, in fact, the statistic implies that American college campuses are 10 times more dangerous than Detroit, which is the most crime-ridden city in America. So, like, how are the colleges managing this? Are they like recruiting their students right out of the nation's prisons? And so,
Maybe.
yeah, and so, I mean, there were a number of things about that. So, the study, so it comes from a survey where um, they'd asked people if they'd been sexually assaulted over the past 7 months or something like that. It was like partway through the academic year, and they asked, did you have any experiences over the past year? And then they basically did a multiplication to try to figure out how many people would have been assaulted during an entire 5-year college career. Okay, because they assume that a college career is 5 years. Right? And why they assume that? Basically, they're trying to get the numbers up. If you use 5 years instead of 4 years, you get bigger numbers, right? But then there's just a whole bunch of things about that were odd, right? One odd thing is like half of the people who are labeled as rape victims in these surveys themselves would say that they were not raped, right? So the surveyor asked you a bunch of questions, and then the surveyor decides that you were raped. But also one of the questions is, were you raped? Right? And half of the people who the survey labels as raped answer no to that question. Right? So that was a bit odd. Right. Also, like there are other surveys, like you can get very different results. So there's another survey that gives you like results that are an order of magnitude less. Right. And
and
so the political activists they just quote whatever's the highest number they can get.
and do women lie about rape?
Yes. Like human beings tell lies, like any large group of human beings sometimes lies. Right. So men sometimes lie and women sometimes lie. And the reasons are generally self-interested.
Yes, like the woman who was having an affair I remember that story. Was teaching on her husband, and then there
Yeah.
was a story of the girl who slept with the boarder in her mother's house, and then her mom found out and became really upset. So she went to the boarder's house, and the boarder said, "Who wants you?" And she decided to
Yeah.
lie on him because she felt rejected.
Yeah. 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 So just to fill in for the listeners, yeah. So the first story is, and so this is from an published academic paper, where this is the Eugene Kanan study that found that something like 40% of rape accusations are false, which is a surprisingly high number and is much higher than what's usually quoted by activists. Okay. Activists usually say between 2 and 10% of rape accusations are false. Okay. And okay, but there's this one particular study that found 40%. So one of the stories which Kanan reports is this woman was having an affair while her husband was away overseas. She became concerned that she'd become pregnant by her lover. So she made up a story that she had been raped in order to explain why she would be pregnant without admitting infidelity. And okay, so now this is not a thing that nice people that you and I would hang out with would do, but there are people like this in the world, and you should not be surprised by this. If you're surprised that that would happen, then you haven't had experience with human beings.
You're a foolish person. Like, look, I we all make errors, but some people are too naive. It's just like the examples of women who bash men. So sometimes women will bash men because they like the man and they want to damage his credibility so that other people will not like him. It happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I,
and we have so many anecdotes of athletes going to prison because women lied about rape. There is this story of this famous writer who she said that she was raped, and it turned out to be a lie. She was not raped.
yeah. So, you might think, wow, this is really deviant behavior. I mean, surely this is really rare that somebody would lie about that. Well, it is pretty rare, but you could say the same thing about rape. Like, rape is super deviant behavior. Like, surely only a small number of men would do that, which is also true, right? These
Yeah,
are highly deviant behavior, right? Either raping somebody or claiming to be raped when you weren't. And only a small number of people would do either of these things, right? But, given that there was a rape accusation, one of those two things has happened.
should we believe all women like the Brett Kavanaugh accusers? We're told to believe all women.
Yeah. Yeah. We should not believe all women. Like, sometimes they lie. They're just like men. They can lie too. They figured out, they figured out the concept of deception just like men have.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I'm happy that Donald Trump sued and ABC will be paying him millions because I won't even bother to pronounce the person's name, but one of the journalists at ABC, George, whatever his name is, he said,
Stephanopoulos.
"Yeah, whatever. You didn't need to pronounce it. I
Yeah.
don't want to give him honor on this show." So he said
It's
that,
not really honor.
yeah,
Anyway, yeah.
yeah. He said that that lady, E. Jean Carroll,
Yeah.
E. Jean Carroll accused Donald Trump of rape.
Yeah.
And he kept repeating he was defending E.G. Carroll and he wouldn't retract it. And it went to court, and now ABC will be forking out millions to Trump
Well, they,
affiliated
yeah. Well,
institutions. And
they,
I
they,
agree.
they settled the lawsuit, so it wasn't
Yeah,
adjudicated in court.
yeah, okay, sorry, that my error.
Yeah. Yeah. But, yeah, I didn't really know why they settled that because, like, well, Trump lost that lawsuit.
No, but
So,
he was not found guilty of rape. He was
oh
not
no,
found guilty of rape.
he was, well, he was found liable in the civil suit for sexual assault,
Yes.
which is very close to rape. And actually, the jury thought that he did commit rape in the ordinary English sense of the word, but that it didn't satisfy the legal definition in New York.
Yes, I read the article and they cited a legal opinion showing that there was the assumption that Trump was guilty, but due to technicalities, he was not going to be charged. However, I take rape allegations quite seriously, like
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people. And I have listened to E. Jean Carroll, and some people would say that he's credible. I don't
yeah,
get that impression, but that's another debate.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like Stephanopoulos probably should have just said he was found liable for sexual assault.
Yeah, but let's do. This is a woman who apparently was a big fan of Donald Trump. She loved The
Yeah,
Apprentice. She
yeah.
told people that they should imagine having sex with Trump and did all sorts of crazy things. I am assuming that Trump met her and he acted inappropriately. Did he rape her? I don't get
Well,
that feeling at all.
well, yeah, it's hard to know without us having been there, but like I generally defer to what the jury found because they heard the evidence and I didn't. I
Okay.
haven't heard the evidence of in
Yeah,
this case.
yeah, that's a smart thing, but it has become a business for some women to accuse men of rape.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. I mean, like, so if it's a famous, especially political figure, then of course there's alternative motives, right? Like, maybe so one, maybe the person is just trying to get a payday, or maybe they're just trying to damage this person's political career or whatever. So you have to be kind of aware of that. Um, but I think, um, usually if that was the case, then they would lose the lawsuit. So
Yeah, but I am sure that you are also aware that today a man can be. It has happened before. Men can get fired for cheating on their wives, adultery, and let's. Well, it's not my business what they do, even though I'm really conservative. But it's not my business. But
yeah,
I just can't appreciate the American obsession with the sexual proclivities of famous men.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think it would probably be better if we left people's private lives alone.
Exactly. Exactly.
And like, yeah, like, is it relevant to the job? That's what we should ask.
No,
Right? Like,
like I
yeah, a
don't care
person
about
is doing
Stormy
something in their
Daniels.
private life. Okay, but is it affecting their job performance? Right. And that's what you should think before you decide if you're the employer, right? Or if you're the voter, like, is it relevant to their job as president?
Yeah, and you can't believe all women. You can't believe people just because of your sex. You have to
No, no,
listen
that's right. Yeah.
carefully to the allegation. So this
Yeah.
lady, she accused Brett Kavanaugh of some impropriety. Her name was Julie Swetnick. What was that her name?
No, I've
Yes,
forgotten.
oh, that. Let me see. Julie Sweat
No, yeah, who's
Swetnick.
Kavanaugh's? No, Christine Blasey Ford.
Yeah, yeah. Julie Swetnick was also one of the accusers too, and Christine Blasey Ford.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like I don't know what happened because I wasn't there. It happened 30 years ago or
Yeah,
whatever. So in fact, like both
and
parties'
Christine
memories
can't
might
remember
not
anything
be.
at all.
Sorry, what?
Christine, she can't remember. Like when she was posed the question, she said, "I don't remember."
Yeah, well, it was 30 years ago. So, right. So, you know, what happened? So I don't know. I assume that something happened, right? Something that was not totally different from what she said. And Brett Kavanaugh himself may not even remember what happened. He might not even remember the incident at all because it was 30 years ago, and to him, it wasn't a big deal, right?
Okay,
Right? Because like he knew that he was just playing at the time. He was just playing. But
okay,
but by the way, women don't play the way men do.
okay,
You cannot do that to a woman. Like you can do like physical roughhousing with a man. You cannot do that to a woman.
okay. But sometimes I wonder, why can't feminists become Puritans? Because they have this approach to sex that's so weird and medieval. Just become a Puritan, become a nun.
Yeah.
No, seriously, just follow Christians, abstain before marriage, don't have a lot
Well,
of sex. Just become a nun because they're always offended. So become a nun.
yeah. Why did the feminists not become nuns?
Yeah, just become a
they
nun.
they don't want the rest of Christianity, um, and they want women to be free to do whatever they want. They just want more advantages for women, basically.
Exactly, exactly. Because feminists have a problem with women being treated as children.
Yes.
And if we're going to treat them like how we treat other people, then they're no longer privileged. That's a contradiction in feminism.
Yeah.
Men are not privileged. So if we treat women like they have agency, then they have to incur the burden of their errors. If you get drunk and you kiss a guy, that's not our business because people get drunk and sometimes they have sex. Like we really don't have to care. We don't have to be empathetic because they have decided that you're an agent. You want to be
Yeah.
treated like an
Yeah.
adult.
we can
Why
still be
not you know
empathetic,
your
right? But
complaints?
yeah, we can still be empathic, but while recognizing responsibility for one's own actions. Yeah.
Exactly my point. You're not 10, you're not a toddler. You are sexually liberated. Sexually liberated people, they have sex in the park. They do all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah.
So why are you always so offended by the idea of sex? Like you're not. Are you want us to go back to the Victorian era when the
Yeah.
culture were like, okay, men sit here, women sit there.
Yeah.
Or if it was one coach, it had this weird curve to to prevent the sexes from touching. I've seen one of those.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're, pointing to a real recent phenomenon, which is there's sort of like a confluence between feminists and like far social conservatives, right? In like they, being kind of more puritanical, right? Like, oh, like people should not be making sexual jokes, in the workplace, and like you should get in trouble for that, and like, men should not be hitting on women explicitly, or whatever. And yeah, there's this sort of weird alliance, right, between like the far left wing feminists and the far right wing social conservatives. Um, maybe for different reasons.
Oh, yeah, but yeah, as I said, I know what feminism is, and you do too. It is rent seeking. So it's like the bootleggers and the Baptists.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
a
The bootleggers and Baptists both
yeah,
agree on wanting alcohol to be illegal for
yes.
different reasons. Like,
Many cultural issues today are really political economy issues. So even wokeism is a political economy issue because conservatives, they don't want wokeism to die. Why would they want it to die? They profit from wokeism. They make money by writing books attacking wokeism. They make money by creating movies. So if wokeism becomes irrelevant, that's going to raise the bar for a conservative discourse. So like let's say in 2010, so back to 20 in 2010, 2012, and when I was in high school and primary school, people read conservative writers who wrote on mostly policy topics or philosophy. Wokeism wasn't a big deal then. But with the advent of wokeism, every person whose IQ is 55 can become a millionaire overnight. Just make a stupid YouTube video attacking George Floyd. But it's true. Like I made a post recently. I said, okay, where did all the smart people go? Like when I was in high school, podcasters were either self-educated or academics like yourself. Today, any idiot can become a podcaster, and it's okay if people want to listen to them, but stop treating them like Noam Chomsky and Thomas Sowell. I just can't get it.
yeah,
Like the best names in conservatives in the conservative space today are most of I wouldn't call any one of those people intellectual, not one. Like
okay,
I would not know they're all the older ones were smarter, like 70s, 50s. But I'm not going to waste my time listening to Candice Owens.
yeah.
And
Like Candace.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't. Yeah, I may know. Like I've read Kevin MacDonald, who's a scholar. He writes on evolutionary anthropology and the Jewish question. So I've read Kevin MacDonald. I've interviewed him. I read Ron Hunt frequently, and I also and I interviewed Ron Hunt some time ago. But I don't respect Candice, and it's okay. But why people love her, I don't know. You're a smart guy, so maybe you can tell me.
yeah. Well, she's pretty charismatic.
Yeah,
But she is a bit of I think, a conspiracy nut, right?
yeah, she's
Right. So it's like you can appreciate the entertainment value without like uncritically accepting what she says, right? There's something where like Bill Maher was interviewing her and like the moon landing came up and she wasn't sure whether the moon landing actually happened or not. And then like Bill Maher is saying, okay, see, like we can't listen to anything else you say after that.
yeah, like when she was on Joe Rogan show and she was basically saying that the climate isn't changing, and I was like, no, the climate is changing. Did human beings cause the climate to change? That's the debate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, so like I'm not a climate scientist, right?
Yeah.
But it's it's generally plausible to me that scientists would be able to tell if the temperature had gone up. That
Yes.
doesn't seem totally intractable, like an intractable problem, right? Like, and I know that it's more difficult than it sounds because we didn't have good measurements 100 years ago, whatever. But still, I believe the temperature has gone up by around 1 degree Celsius or
Yes,
something.
yes. But that's what I'm saying. Like some of these skeptics, it's not like they're saying, okay, then I have read the hockey stick controversy. I read Michael Mann and I read the response to Michael Mann, that key guy, and this is the conclusion. They're not saying that. They're just saying, okay, we don't like the planet was always warming. Like there's no climate change or there's no global warming. That's all they
Hmm.
can say. I'm just annoyed. Like I can't comprehend nonsense. I find it difficult to digest garbage.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I suspect that the main impetus behind the climate change isn't happening movement is that they don't want it to be happening. Right. And like people on the left keep talking about it, and we're against the left. So we're just going to say the opposite of whatever they say. Right. Which, happens on both sides. Right. Like if the right wingers make a true point, the left wingers will still try to not accept it. They'll just like try to say the opposite, whatever it might be. Right.
Okay, so let's get to another myth. Are blacks disproportionately killed by the police?
So no, right, it's disproportionately low. So the reason why people say that is in America, black people are around an eighth of the population, but among the victims of police homicides, and I mean homicides by the police, um, a quarter of them are black. Okay, so it's disproportionate. So like you're twice as likely to be killed by the police if you're black as white without taking into account any other factors. Okay, so that is true. However, is that due to racism? Or could it be due to differences in the behavior of blacks and whites? Right. So, like, well, one thing is we could look at police contacts, like how often the police make contact with a suspect. Right. And so, if you control for police contacts, it turns out that given that the police make contact with a suspect, they're more likely to kill the suspect if he's white than if he's black. Right.
Okay,
And
so this is I have another brilliant question. Most victims of crime are men, and serial killers are even more likely to be victims of crimes because people would want to kill them for a number of reasons. They're always killing people. If the police are doing an investigation, the interaction between the police and the serial killer could become deadly. A random person could do his own research and decide to kill a serial killer. So serial killers are more likely to be killed than other people. And by a serial killer, we're not talking about somebody who kills random people, mass killer. So if you're a member of a gang, you are a serial killer because gangsters kill other people. So
yeah.
we accept that
Well,
dangerous men. Repeat what you just said.
so I don't know statistics about serial killers specifically, but I know that criminals are more likely to be victims of crime themselves.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's partly because they're constantly doing criminal activities with other criminals. So
Yes.
like they're doing drug deals with drug dealers, right? Or with drug users, drug addicts. And like so the people they're interacting with tend to be more violent and more crime prone. Right. And just like also because they live in high crime neighborhoods. If you're a member of a gang, there are probably rival gangs. So it's likely that your gang gets into violence with the other gangs, which is a large part of the violence in America. A lot of the violence is drug related also. Right. Yeah. So, um, okay, but where were we going with that? So
Where to,
criminals
wait,
more
I was going to give an example. I'm saying we can accept the logic of serial killers and gangsters being killed at higher rates and men being in prison, but we can't accept that black men are likely to be in prison because they're committing crimes. Why
likely.
do people struggle to accept that?
Yeah. Well, it just goes against left wing ideology, right? Because in left wing ideology, everything is the fault of America and white men, cis hetero white men, and Western society or whatever, and nothing is ever the fault of the minorities. Because if you say that, you're blaming the victim or whatever, and you're like being racist or something. Okay, but if you control for crime rates, then black people are a lot less likely to be killed by police than white people.
Yes, the
And
real side of Roland Fryer and Lois James.
yeah, it makes sense to control for crime rates because like that's why the police would make contact with you. Like the reason why you might wind up being killed by the police is that you committed a crime, and like maybe you acted aggressively when the police tried to arrest you. So like a good proxy for that is rates of violent crime, right? And also like a really good proxy would be rates by rates at which different racial groups kill police officers. Okay, so if you control for the rate at which Black people kill police officers, the police are disproportionately less violent towards Black people. Right.
Yes.
So like Black people commit 43% of the homicides against police. Right? 43% of the cop killers are Black people.
Yes, I was
Black
about
people are
to
only
say
an eighth of
that.
the population.
Yes. However, blacks also comprise 40% of murders in the US and 43% of cop killers.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So like that could explain why Black people are more likely to be killed by the police, because the Black people are more likely to behave violently towards the police.
Yes. And more likely to resist arrest.
Yeah.
But what
Right. So
about,
like, yeah, you don't want to be killed by the police. Well, don't fight them. Like don't attack the cop. Right. In general, by the way, don't attack people who are armed. That's
yes,
like a
not
smart
smart
piece of
at all.
life advice
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's not smart. This like I remember being a high school students, like there's this writer, what's his name again? Jeffrey Miller. Yes, the guy who wrote about, he writes on evolution, and this is the guy who explained why that particular bird was so fancy to attract woman, that theory.
Oh, the peacock.
Yeah, the peacock. How could I forget it? Jeffrey Miller. Yes. So every now and then on Twitter, he likes to ask people, name one idea that you believe now that you didn't believe some years ago. I've never responded. When I'm on Twitter, I just look at information. I don't really socialize. But my response would be the salience of IQ. When I was a teenager, I didn't view IQ as a legitimate construct. But then again, what do teenagers know?
Yeah.
But after getting some experience and doing more research, I know that IQ is real.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, like, I have not, in fact, read the research on IQ. Just anecdotally, I've noticed that some people are smart and other people are not so smart.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
I know that IQ is real. But what about drug laws? Are drug laws racist? Like I always assume that crack cocaine attracted stiffer penalties because crack users were more violent. What's the answer? Why are blacks being arrested for using crack?
Oh, yeah. Well, so crack cocaine is more popular in the Black community. Powder cocaine is more popular in the white community. You get a little bit higher sentences for crack than for powder cocaine. Okay. Now, by the way, like some activists quote the difference as like you get 100 times more, 100 times harsher penalties for crack. That's totally false. Right? It's not 100 times. Like I've forgotten the statistics, but it's a little bit harsher if you just
I
listen.
can read it. Just prior to the 2010 reform, people convicted for crack offenses got an average of 9.6 years in prison, while powder cocaine offenders got an average of 7.3 years in prison,
Yeah.
making a ratio of 1.3 to 1, not
Yeah.
100 to 1. And this
Yeah.
is from Kurtzley Ben. So that person who was writing on the reformed of 2010.
Yeah.
I looked up the individual. I don't remember if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's
I
right.
did
Yeah.
it because I did it because I wrote a review of your book. It's not published as yet, but
Oh,
I sent it somewhere.
oh, good. Okay. So we'll see. Um, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there's this disparity, about 30% disparity in the sentences. Now, the reason for that was some people decided to crack down on crack, right? Pun intended. Um, okay. But the reason for cracking down on crack cocaine was not that people were racist and they just wanted Black people to be punished more for being Black. The reason was that legislators, and whenever this happened, 1980 or whatever, 1980s, I think, um, crack was devastating Black communities. So they did it to help the Black community because they thought that they were going to stop crack cocaine. and like they had particular concerns. So like the Congressional Black Caucus met with Richard Nixon to urge him to ramp up the drug war, right?
Yeah.
Black legislators, the majority of them voted in favor of these drug law, like these escalations of the drug war, like, you know, the three major times when they escalated the drug war legislatively. Most Democrats supported it, and most Black legislators supported it. And the reason for that was that people thought the drug laws would help. That's why they made them. So they thought that it would make things better. They didn't think that it would just be a failure and it would just result in greater costs and benefits, which is what in fact happened. Okay. So if you judge racism by intentions, no, it wasn't racism. Like it was in favor of Black people, right? If you judge it by the actual effects, yeah, the actual effects turned out to be bad. It didn't work.
All right. And you, what I like about this book is that it's really concise, just over 200 pages. The writing is accessible. Is it a bestseller as yet?
It's not. It's not a bestseller. I don't think. No. Sold a couple thousand copies, I believe.
But it was published in September, so can it become a bestseller? I think it has that potential.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to promote it on podcasts like this, so
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
more people hear about it.
I think it has potential. So now we're going to talk about transgenderism. What is
Yeah.
social contagion?
Sorry. Say again.
What's social contagion?
Oh, it's a phenomenon that just like people are doing something because other people are doing it. Okay, so like um, pretty well known phenomenon is anorexia nervosa among teenage girls can spread by social contagion, meaning like well, young girls are influenced by other young girls who have anorexia. So like other people who have it, and then like you acquire this. This happens with psychological conditions sometimes. Okay, and that's particularly relevant because this might be part of the spread of transgenderism. Right. So this phenomenon where people say that they're the opposite gender from what they appear, right? Or their gender doesn't match their biological sex. So there's evidence that this is spreading by social contagion. So some of the evidence is that transgenderism runs in friend groups, right? So there's been a big explosion of transgender identification in the last several years. And some of it is like, running in friend groups. So like there's like a group of 5 girls, and then like they all come out as transgender or something like that, right? And also like it's just like not credible that many people are really trans, right? So the DSM, so this is the standard reference work for psychiatrists. The DSM-5, 5th edition in 2013, reported that something like 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 100,000 people were transgender. But in recent surveys, it's gone up to something like 1%, right, among young people. And that's insane. There's no way that many people really acquired gender dysphoria or that they acquired it purely naturally. Like it's got to be that something else is going on.
Yes. What's autogenophilia? Autogenophilia. What's that?
Yeah. So it's a phenomenon of some males are sexually excited by the thought of themselves having a female body. And so that can motivate them to transition, right? To try to modify their body to make it more feminine. Now, so that is part of the phenomenon of male to female transsexuals. The evidence that this is happening is from surveys in which male to female transgender people actually say that they have feelings like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now I don't know what percentage of people it is, but it's some non-negligible percentage. One of the leading theorists of this is Anne Lawrence, who is herself an autogynephile, self-identified autogynephilic trans woman. Right, so like it's pretty clear that that's a real phenomenon.
Autogynephilia. So there's this person. He is now married to a woman. His name is Hunter Ash. He wrote an article for the Blaze, and basically Hunter is saying that he has evolved, he's no more mature, and he's no longer trans, and that is stupid to encourage people like him to castrate themselves. They should be allowed to reproduce freely, because there's a link between transgenderism and intelligence, and I've seen a study on the topic. There are others, that's what he said, but I've read one, and that's I agree. That's the part of the article I find the most compelling. Why would you encourage productive people to just turn themselves into mascots?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you
Yes,
raised like,
particularly productive people to turn themselves into mascots.
yeah, I mean, what, like, one of the, I guess, the serious costs of transitioning minors is that they could lose their reproductive capacity. So you,
Puberty blockers were blocked in UK.
and yeah, like, you could be doing irreversible damage, right? As the title of one recent book has it. Now, I think that adults can do whatever they want with their body. Like, it's not necessarily a good idea, but you own your body, so you can do whatever you want. But I think that minors have to be protected by the adults. So, like, if you have a kid who says that they think they're the other gender, uh, the like their parents have to decide whether to let them transition. And just for the purposes of deciding that, just be aware that something like 80% of people will desist.
And
Like
what's
around,
Easter? What's that?
yeah. So in other words, like they say that they have gender dysphoria. 80% of the time, they will later come to accept their birth gender. Like, so they will no longer be gender dysphoric, or no longer identify as trans. Okay, so like just take that into account. Like if you have a kid who thinks that they're trans, just take that into account.
Yeah, but there's a new study out that was published in a sexual journal, Archives of Sexual Behavior, I think that's the name, saying that people evolve out of gender dysphoria. It's not an
Yeah.
unusual condition and people evolve.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
probably,
So
no, well, not probably, we should not be encouraging children to transition.
yeah. Right. Yeah. You should probably, like, most of the time you should probably just wait and see, and like it'll probably resolve on its own. That, which by the way is what the DSM says, right? The DSM in 2013. I'm worried about, like, when they come out with a sixth edition, because if they came out with a sixth edition now, it would totally change what it said because of political pressures. Somebody would politically pressure them to say, no, desistance doesn't happen.
Yes. So we're going to move on to stereotype threat. What's that?
Yeah. So, well, it's a um, phenomenon, or alleged phenomenon, in which people will perform worse on a test if you remind them of their identity group. And in particular, it's a group that has some kind of negative stereotype. So then they will be caused to conform to the stereotype. Right. So, like, supposedly what happens is you give Black people a test, and if you remind them of their race, then they perform worse on the test because of a stereotype that Black people are worse, like, or less intelligent or less good at whatever the subject is. Okay, supposedly this also happens with women with math tests, because there's a stereotype that they're bad at math. And then, okay, now, so there are many studies on this. The incorrect framing of this is, like, there are many sources that represent it as maybe the entire test score gap between Blacks and whites could be explained by stereotype threat. Okay,
No,
so, like,
but continue.
yeah, not true, right? But you can find statements that appear to say that in, like, journalistic reports, and, like, even a couple of academic sources say that, and that's just a misunderstanding of the original study, right? So what happened in the original study was there's a graph that's misleading, basically, and it makes it look
The
like
clause. Okay, so hold on. I would like to read it. The Claude Steele graph.
yeah. So there's a graph that makes it appear as if the test score gap between Blacks and whites can be eliminated by eliminating the stereotype threat. But what the graph actually meant was that, okay, like, Black people tend to underperform white people by a certain amount, and if you add stereotype threat, then they underperform even more. Okay? So that doesn't explain the original test score gap. Like, the stereotype threat doesn't explain, like, the test score gap in SAT.
It's amplifying. That's what they're saying. That the stereotype threat amplifies the test score gap.
Yeah,
And he
allegedly,
said
right.
essentially the black students got a handicap. That is why in the non-diagnostic condition, the graph shows them equal to the white students.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a graph that shows, the performance of the blacks and whites in the non-threatening condition where they didn't, whatever, allegedly they didn't create this, you know, nervousness among the students about how they perform. Okay. And then like it shows the black and white students performing about equally well. But what that graph actually means is they adjusted for the students' SAT scores, and black
Yes.
students tend to have lower SAT scores. So the black students are doing about as well compared to their SAT scores.
Yeah.
Doesn't explain why the SAT scores are different, right? And black people underperform white people by about one standard deviation on the SATs and other standardized tests, right? And IQ tests, right? So we haven't explained that.
So, has it been replicated?
Yeah, there have been many studies that find stereotype threat. Um, and now, there's this phenomenon that not everyone has yet absorbed, but there's a kind of problem in social science that a lot of results that have been found in social science are not really true. Okay, so like there are many times when somebody does a study and then it won't replicate. Okay, but usually nobody tries to replicate it, so they don't find out.
Okay.
Right, but there was a fairly recent study where they tried to replicate a whole bunch of social psychology things, experiments, and they failed. Like most of them failed.
And the stereotype threat was that replicated by Russell Warren. Psychologist Russell Warren looked for strict replication attempts in the literature on stereotype threat, that is, attempts to closely reproduce specific previous studies as opposed to mere conceptual replications. He found four such attempts. The only one marginally succeeded in reproducing the original effect. The other three unambiguously failed. And
Yeah,
there's Pennington. Pennington's research did not show the stereotype threat to be favorable either.
yeah, yeah,
It cast some doubts on it.
yeah. Good, yeah, yeah. So that quote mentions conceptual replication. So one of the things that happens in social psychology is that they try to replicate an effect, but using a different technique. So there are a whole bunch of cases where somebody allegedly finds a stereotype threat, but using a different method than one of the original researchers. And the reason that's problematic is um, people can try different things. Like they can keep trying out different methods for getting the effect until they get one that works, and then they can report that. And it could just be chance, right? So the other thing that's interesting, important to know about the stereotype threat is there were so some of the studies try to closely replicate the conditions in actual standardized tests. And some of them have conditions that are just totally not like a real standardized test. There are some that use actual standardized tests, like somebody's actually taking the achievement test or something like that. And then they have the students report their race either before or after they take the test. Okay, and in those, it turns out that there's no effect. So like whether you report your race before the test, which is supposed to activate stereotype threat, or after the test, which then should have no effect on your performance on the test, makes no difference to the test scores, right? All right, so it really looks like this doesn't explain the gap in test scores in real standardized tests.
But why would it?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, right? So like the theory is that, you remind the person of their race and then it causes stress because they're worried that they're going to confirm the stereotype about their race, right? Because they're like really concerned about their race, okay? About making their race look good or something like that. Okay, so it causes stress and then it distracts them or whatever, and then they perform worse. Now, so that's like a hypothesis that kind of makes sense, but just if you know about social psychology in general, stuff like that seems like it kind of makes sense and is also kind of like, gee whiz, wow, usually
Are
turns out.
usually bad studies, yes. Like power pose. Do you remember that study? The power
Yeah,
pose
yeah,
study, that wasn't replicated.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And
all the results of social psychology that sound amazing that you want to tell your friends about, those are usually not true.
yes, so power pose was not replicated. And there's a study saying that victims of the Holocaust, they are not worse than non-Jewish victims in terms of cognitive ability. There's a study from Africa suggesting that nutrition cannot explain disparities in cognitive performance because malnourished children don't do worse than their peers. What's the effect of stress on accountability? I think that it is at best minimal.
Yeah. Well, like notice how from the same hypothesized cause, you could equally well predict the opposite effect. Right? So the hypothesized cause is people are worried about confirming stereotypes about their race. And then the prediction is, oh, they're going to perform worse. But you could equally rationally predict, no, no, they're going to perform better
Yes.
because they're concerned about confirming the stereotypes. So they're going to
Yeah,
try harder
but
to perform.
that's funny. That's what all of these minorities say. Oh, I am black. They did not expect me to achieve, so I worked so hard. Or I was from a poor background, and they did not expect me to achieve, so I worked so hard. That's what they always say.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So, like, you might think maybe the effect will be the reverse. Maybe this stereotype threat will increase test scores. And this is characteristic of, so like theories that have a lot of options, right? This is like, it's characteristic of scientific theories that are not good, not good scientific theories, that you could predict a variety of different things on the basis of the hypothesized cause. Like, if you can predict both A and the exact opposite of A, then there's like, right, it's sort of like not such a great theory.
Exactly. And do you know what's even worse than stereotype threat? Implicit bias. What's
Yeah.
that?
Um, so, it's widely reputed among progressives that a lot of people have unconscious racism. And the way that we, quote, prove this is basically reaction time experiments. So you have this thing where people are required to form an association. Well, for example, association between Black people and goodness. And so, like, you're supposed to press a button when you see something on the screen that is either related to Black people or related to goodness. Okay. Like, you see the word happiness, you press the button because that's good. And then you see Martin Luther King and you press the button because it's good. Okay. And then, simultaneously you have to form an association between white people and badness. Okay. And then, like, you can do a variation where you have to form the association between Black people and badness and white people and goodness. And it turns out that people find it easier to form the association between white people and goodness as opposed to Black people and goodness, right? As measured by the reaction time. Okay. And so that's supposed to show that people have unconscious racism against Black people.
Or maybe they are working with the available evidence. The literature on stereotypes suggests that most stereotypes are indeed true, and several papers have been written on the topic.
Yeah. 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 Generally, people, it might even be that stereotypes tend to understate the actual truth, right?
I agree. So, does it predict discrimination? IAT, implicit association test. Does it predict discrimination?
Yeah, so it turns out no, right? Excuse me. Yeah, so um, there are all of these sort of like experts who get hired by companies and universities and whatever to train the employees to teach them about implicit bias. But there's no evidence that this actually helps anything, right? And like the academic studies that try to find a correlation between your implicit bias and actual discriminatory behavior don't find that, right? So like there's one study that I refer to in the book that says, well, actually there isn't really any discrimination to be explained. It's like when you do laboratory experiments and you try to get people to engage in, like clear discriminatory behavior, like on average, there's zero discrimination. And the reason I said on average zero is there's some people will apparently discriminate in favor of whites, and there are other people who will apparently discriminate in favor of Blacks in the same way, and they tend to balance out. So there's no overall discrimination, right?
But
So like there isn't really a thing to be predicted.
maybe these researchers should expand their horizon outside of the conceptual world and analyze the data from Resume Builder. Resume Builder suggests that there is discrimination in favor of non white applicants.
Mm.
Or they can analyze the statements of Google executives or Microsoft executives, and then they will conclude that the reverse is true. It's really white people who are experiencing discrimination and
Yeah.
not
So
minorities.
Go, yeah. So I haven't seen the evidence from Resume Builder.
Okay.
Um, I, so there are some of these, resume studies that find a slight disadvantage for Black people, like people with Black names on the
Yes,
resume.
discuss that.
Um, I think it must depend on what your industry is. So if you're in the academic world, then it's definitely a big advantage to be Black. And I know that because I'm in the academic world. I haven't done a study, but like if you were in the academic world, you would absolutely know that. Because, you have things like you're sitting in a search committee and people say, "Hey, like this person's Black, let's interview him." And no one ever says this person's white, let's interview him. No one ever cites whiteness as a reason, and they do cite Blackness. And then you have things where like, you're trying to schedule an interview with a Black candidate, and he's the only one that you can't schedule an interview with because his schedule is packed with interviews, right? From all these other schools who want to interview him. So that's anecdotal. But like if you had the anecdotal experience of working for 20 years in academia, you would absolutely agree with me.
Yeah, and I saw a study. This is not an opinion. This was a study showing that probably if you're trans or non-binary, you are more likely to get a job. That was recently published, a 2024
Yeah.
study. So there is preference for people with the annoying description in their bio or on their resume. He, him, she, whatever it is. I just hate seeing that.
They, them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so
So
annoying.
like I don't have even anecdotal evidence on that because like there's so few trans or non-binary people that we've seen. But I totally believe that. That's totally plausible to me because of the huge left-wing bias of the academy.
Yeah, it is really annoying. And does implicit bias training work? Page 75.
Yeah, basically there's no evidence that it does anything. Right? So you can change people's scores on the implicit association test. So you can get people to be faster in the reaction time experiments, basically. So you reduce their measured implicit bias, but there's no evidence that that affects anything else. Right? So it's just a waste of time and money.
But look, implicit association tests will suffer from measurement errors for a number of reasons. It is difficult to determine bias. So for example, people conflate being handsome with competence. They conflate height with competence. They conflate obesity with incompetence. So when you show a person a picture of a fat black man and he doesn't like it, what's the issue? Is it because he's fat or is it because he's black? Is it because he's handsome or is it because he's ugly?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, there are multiple factors besides race that affect people's judgments, and some of them are prejudices, and probably overall physical attractiveness is a bigger factor. That's probably a huge factor,
Exactly.
right? However, I also think that all of these things tend to be swamped if you get real information. So, like once you've known somebody for a while, um, I think the effects of all those things will wash out. If I know a lot about you, then I'm not going to go on the basis of your appearance. If I know nothing about you, maybe I'll judge you on the basis of your appearance.
Yes. And sometimes we should judge people based on how they look. Like you're not a shallow person if you judge people solely on future performance because first appearance, that's the only information that's in your sight. So you have to use it properly.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're meeting somebody for the first time, all you know about them is their appearance.
And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So I'm looking at you and I see books. So what do I know? You like to read.
Yeah. Yeah. But then it turns out that these are actually fake.
Oh yeah, 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 I can see that now that they're fake, but a good background. I need a better background too. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
looks.
Although, even though they're fake, this is a Gettier case because there actually are books back here. I just
Okay, yeah, yeah, funny. You have a lot of. In my house in Jamaica, I had more books, but I'm not in Jamaica now.
yeah.
We're going to talk about. Oh, before we move on, stereotype threat. In your book, you say that they're not examining real world events; they're lab experiments. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, a little bit, like a couple of the studies involve actual administrations of standardized tests. There's like something called the computerized placement tests, which are used for placing people into classes in community colleges or something. So they did an experiment with that, where they were actually really taking the test to determine their placement in community college, and they did this, variation where they asked the person about their race either at the beginning or at the end, and they found that there was no effect.
All right. So now we can talk about generational wealth. Wow. Myth. Most wealth is due to inheritance. Reality, based on what I've heard, most inheritances are really small.
Yeah.
Family connection and luck. Once you are born poor, it is difficult or impossible to move up the income ladder. Reality. You're going to move up the income ladder if you move to a so called racist Western white country.
Yeah, that's true. As a side point, yeah, like if you move from Nigeria to America, your expected income is going to like multiply by 50 fold or whatever it was. I forgot
Yes.
what the number was.
Or
It's
to
like a
be
huge
committed.
Yeah. And, you might think, wow, like, but America is such a horribly racist country. Won't the black immigrants do worse? And like, there will be even worse prejudice against the immigrants, right? Because not only are they black, but like they have a strong accent, right? They're gonna have worse English language skills. So people, right? The racists will hate them even more. So they're gonna do worse. No, actually, black immigrants do better than the average American, right? In terms of income.
Yes.
And so I don't think it's about racism, right? I think it's about, well, like the people who immigrate, they come here to work hard,
Yes.
and America is a land of opportunity.
It
Right?
is.
It's a cliche, but it's also true.
Yes. So is generational wealth real? Are most millionaires because of their parents?
So no, right? So there's a actual survey of millionaires where they asked them like how they got their money, and like most of them said, well, I was just like saving for a long time and investing, regular savings and investments, and then your wealth grows. Right. And and the other thing is like you have to have a decent job. So like get some
Yeah.
valuable skills, get some skills that other people value. And that's the main way. That was what the majority of millionaires said about how they acquired their wealth, and they did not acquire it.
79% of these millionaires are first generation millionaires.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I forgot the percent. So what is it?
79%. Ramsey? Yeah, you cited Ramsey.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And so, like I think people might be thinking of like a few high profile cases like the Walton family or something where
Well,
like they're
okay, so let me tell you what I've studied. In generational wealth is indeed real, but it is said that after three generations, the family wealth dissolves. If your family is rich for three generations, that's not a dynasty. You need to be wealthy for at least five generations. And because America ranks number one on the Intelligence Capital Index, is the best place for scaling talent, people who start businesses in Canada incorporate in Canada and in Delaware. So the America, according to this study that was published by Hoover scholars, has the best social infrastructure in the world.
yeah.
As a result, it's easy to perpetuate generational wealth in America. So there are families who were rich before independence, and some of them are still eminent today. So, like this family has faded into the background, but their branches, which out of money, like the Whitney family. People don't talk about the Whitneys, but the Whitneys are probably America's most elite family. They were successful before America became independent. Eli Whitney and his relatives, and some of them today are ambassadors and they're still wealthy.
Yeah.
Some branches at least. So because the social infrastructure in America is so good, there's still many wealthy Gilded Age families.
Yeah.
The Carnegie family sold some of their assets, and the Phipps family, they own a trust company and investment company. They're still wealthy, but those are still a minority. So I'm not knocking your argument. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
that generational wealth is a positive. If your family can maintain wealth for 200 years, that's an achievement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so yeah, that's great for your family. I think
Yes,
what people are thinking is, oh, so that means that the society it just like rewards the people who already have, and it doesn't reward the people who don't have money, right? But that's just not true. Like if you look at
No.
statistics on upward mobility, like there's a lot of upward mobility in the United States, right? So like most people who start out in the bottom quintile are going to move up, and then like most people who start out in the top quintile, they're going to move down.
Yes.
So
Those at the bottom were most likely to go up. US tax data. The lowest quintile of individuals saw a mean income increase of 68% for men and 79% for women. It's higher for women. Women are coming from a lower base. But yes, America's
yeah,
great income mobility.
yeah, I think that was
In
over
the
10
eye as
years or
a,
something.
yeah, this is from 2015, but the American Enterprise Institute has a similar study that was published maybe last year or early this year.
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
newer
yeah.
studies
People at the bottom tend to move up.
yes, the
Yeah,
newer
that's
studies
just the
are
truth.
confirming
Like,
it. Yeah,
right,
they're
sorry, say,
confirming it.
yeah. And so, and like, I'd like to say, like, if you want to help people, like, a good message is not, oh, you can't succeed if you're born poor, you're just screwed. So, too bad for you. No, a good message is to tell people what they have to do to get ahead. Now, if in fact there is nothing they can do, then I guess you can tell them that, but that's not true. So, like the left is just like they're making things worse for the people that they think that they're helping.
Yeah, and
Right?
you might disagree, but I think that it is amazing that after so many years, some families in America are still wealthy.
Yeah. But
Cardi
oh, by the way, like I
McMillan,
wanted to say the other thing about that is, well, yeah, there's a correlation between your parents' wealth and your wealth,
yes.
but that doesn't mean that, you only succeed by getting lucky to have the right parents. Like it might be because like the children of smart people tend to be smart. The children of hardworking people tend to be hardworking, right? Okay, so like it may be that the actual merit that made you earn wealth is correlated, over generations.
Yes. So the tax burden, the rich are not paying their fair share of taxes. Wow.
Yeah,
It's true.
yeah, I'm constantly hearing that, and it's just ridiculous. And like the people who
Yes.
say that, like they never tell you what they think the fair share is, and they never tell you like any evidence of that. And the reason is that it's complete bullshit. It's like the rich are paying way more than their fair share on any intuitive notion of what a fair share is. Okay.
Yes.
So like if you take the top 20% of income earners, they're paying almost all of the federal budget, like almost all of the income taxes. And like the bottom 40% is not paying anything, right? Like, okay, like that is if you take the amount of money they get from the government and then the amount of taxes that they pay, they're paying less than the amount that they're getting from the government. So they're a net burden. And like, the country would be bankrupt if everyone was like that. And
But
like the only reason it's possible is that the top 20% are paying this huge amount that's just like way more than their share in order to enable the bottom 40% to get kickbacks from the government.
it is it is an indication of upward classism. Classism can either be upward or downward. Rich people are bearing the burden of taxation. If rich people did not pay their fair share, the government wouldn't be able to fund the welfare state.
Yeah. I
And if
mean, well,
any any
they could
group,
do it the way that they do it in Sweden, which is like the middle class pays more. But we don't like that because American politicians are always saying that they're in favor of the middle class, and like the average voter thinks that they're middle class, and so they will not vote for the politician if the politician tries to distribute taxes equitably. So
but
they give a huge break to the middle class.
in Sweden, the tax system is not redistributive because people get what they pay for. As you said, tax rates
Yeah.
are generally higher in Sweden. People in Sweden they pay a lot of taxes, so they get what they paid for. The country with the most redistributive system in America in the world is actually America. Don't argue with me. Argue with the empirical research.
Yeah,
America,
that
it's
might
not
be.
before. Yes, it's
Yeah, that
America.
may be true. We have a highly progressive tax system, right? And yeah, like it. So in Sweden, they have more social welfare programs, but they distribute the tax burden more evenly and hence more fairly, right? So the middle class has to pay more. In America, we want the middle class to get almost a free ride. So like we have this huge burden on the wealthy.
Yes, and if any group should benefit from the tax system. That should be rich people. Why are people rich? Because they create products and services that other people want to use. And
Yeah.
rich people are less likely to use social welfare. So
Yeah.
they pay more than their fair share.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, like if you think that the fair share depends upon how much you're consuming, which is kind of intuitive. Like if we were at dinner and like, the bill comes and we want to divide it up, well, we might divide it up according to how much each person ordered, and like that would seem fair. So if you look at that, well, the rich people are consuming a lot less government services, right?
Yeah,
They cost the government less for police protection because there's a lot lower crime. So they don't have as much cost for patrolling crime in their wealthy neighborhoods. And then, like, many of them send their kids to private schools instead of public schools. So they're costing the government less money there. So, like, overall, actually, the rich people should get a lower absolute tax bill,
exactly.
not only a lower percentage, not the same percentage, but even a lower percentage because they
I
should get a
agree.
lower absolute amount. If that's your notion of fairness.
Yeah, it's
Um,
upward classism. So again, I'm from Jamaica, and I do believe that Jamaica could be the most studied developing country. So especially if you are interested in history, like all these students want to write on Jamaica, they keep churning out book after book on Jamaica. And
yeah,
in Jamaica, the government is obsessed with poor people,
yeah,
not middle class people and not rich people, but with poor people. Because for some strange reason, Jamaicans think that poverty is virtuous. It's a sign of success. So they love to say, "Oh, I am poor" or "I am suffering." Even when they're doing well, they're always poor and suffering. I don't buy into that crap. Nobody wants to be poor. Then
yeah, yeah.
again,
Well, this is like an important aspect of culture, right? Like
yes,
in Britain, I think people try to exaggerate their social class, like they try to pretend to be aristocrats or something when they're not.
yes.
And maybe in Jamaica, they try to pretend to be poor.
They're always poor, or
And
I'm a ghetto youth or some crap
yeah,
like that. I don't know
this
what's
is
the
this
problem.
is really not a good culture to have,
The
right?
Jamaica culture is not conducive to development. That's why I'm not
Yeah,
there. Like
and
all of
I think the
all
best
of my
way,
friends, like a lot of my friends, we went to high school, and it was my high school in Jamaica does really well academical. So some people went to MIT. This one guy went to Silicon Valley. He was tested. His IQ is like 140, so he's smart. But many of my contemporaries, we are migrating. We're starting over from scratch, like myself. Why?
yeah,
Because we don't want to be in Jamaica.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like that's how we start. Like I'm spreading candle, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm working now, but I want a better job." And we're all starting over from scratch, which is not it's not fun, but we want to do better. That's why we're taking the risk.
yeah, yeah. So, like my sense is the culture in America is more like you try to represent that you started out low and you succeeded.
Exactly.
Like an American would exaggerate how good they've done, how much they've improved, right? And that's the best culture.
Yeah, so like the government lowered the GCT on electricity, and people are saying, "Wow, most poor people don't pay the GCT on electricity." And I said, "Well, when poor people benefit from tax policy, you don't complain. So if rich people and entrepreneurs benefit, why should you complain? They're taxpayers too. It would be better to just stop redistributing wealth.
Yes.
That would be the common sense thing to do. Just stop the wealth redistribution. Don't do not distribute upwards and don't distribute downwards. Simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like with my analogy of the people at dinner, like I'm at dinner with a bunch of friends and like imagine that when the bill comes, somebody says, "Well, Mike Heumer makes more money than the rest of us. I
Do
think
you
pay
do you
for
make
everything."
more money than your friends?
A lot of them, yeah. I'm, I'm doing pretty well financially. Okay.
But you're a professor. I thought professors are supposed to be poor.
Well, I don't have a bunch of lawyer and businessman friends. Most of my friends are other professors and
Oh,
graduate students. So okay, but I'm
oh,
doing well
okay.
for a professor.
And you're really smart and charismatic. That's why you're doing so well.
Uh, well, yeah, partly that, and like I get money from my books, and I get money from my my blog, and then I have real estate investments, and so like
Oh yeah, you're also you're into real estate investment, so you're an entrepreneurial professor.
You could say that. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
My wife and
oh,
I own 4 condos. So
you and your wife.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, Michael, I just forgot. Of course, you're entrepreneurial. Your mother's Chinese. They love money. Oh, yes, how could I not see? But it's true. They're really into business. It's because
yeah.
their
Well,
parents Chinese, right? Right. It's because she's Chinese. They're really
yeah.
into business.
So yeah, I don't know very much about this, but apparently my Chinese grandparents moved to Hawaii, and they like started up a bakery, and then like by the time I was around, to visit them in Hawaii, they owned an 18-story apartment building in Honolulu, downtown Honolulu.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
It's
Chinese,
like,
the Chinese. They okay. Well, you should. I'm interested in culture and development. And East Asians are really high in long term orientation. Because they're high in long term in orientation, they save more than other people. So there's this paper saying it's not all about, no, it wasn't IQ, that was not the topic. But the paper was, it's also about long term orientation. So it's
yes,
it studied the link between long term orientation and innovation done by yes, Polish researchers. So East Asians, they're really high in long-term orientation, and it's difficult to engage in capital formation without long-term orientation. So
yes, yeah,
the
yeah,
Chinese people who went to the Caribbean, they did well academically, but many of them started businesses and they saved and invested. Black people who were educated, they became professionals, but the Chinese working class, they were entrepreneurial. And I say working class because the Chinese who went to Jamaica were not elite. They were working class people in China. They went to Jamaica to work as indentured laborers.
yeah.
But by the 60s, Chinese people in the Caribbean, they were out earning whites.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, like to continue my story, like, okay, I'm a rich professor. So I'm out with my friends and they say, oh, like Mike Heumer has a lot of money. He should pay the entire bill. And right. Or maybe he should pay 90% of the bill because he makes so much money. And I go like, well, I don't want to pay.
Yeah.
Like, why I only ordered 20% of the food. Why am I paying 90% of the bill? Right. And then imagine they said, well, we're just going to force you. If you don't pay the amount that we want, we're going to kidnap you and like lock you in a cage. Like, that's bad behavior. Well, that's the way the government behaves, right? They
Yes.
like, right, like if you make more money, then you have to pay more for these common goods that everyone's consuming, even though you're consuming less of them than other people. You have to pay more just because you have a lot of money. Like, is that fair?
Yes. Like, no, but they say you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. So this professor online had a PhD and he teaches at a good school and said, I have a PhD and I'm working class because I live paycheck to paycheck. And I said, well, if you don't know to use your talent to create money, that's your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his business. Like
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
when
Like,
you when you have a PhD from an elite school in America, that's access. It gives you access to the right people. So if you're poor, that's not my problem.
yeah. No, I think like a lot of left-wing people think that they can't do things that a lot of people have done. Like, oh, yeah, no, there's no way to climb the economic ladder if you start out poor. But actually, a lot of people have done it, right? And like, oh no,
Exactly.
there's no way that I could possibly save money because, like, I have to pay the rent or whatever. Yeah, but like a lot of people actually do save money anyway, and even though they're poor and like they have to pay the rent, whatever. Like they, figure out a way.
They do. Like some people, they seize the business opportunity everywhere. That's all. I have a colleague, a mentor. She's like that. Like she only sees money.
Yeah.
Yeah, she sees the opportunity everywhere. Now let's get to regulation. Are regulations good or bad?
Yeah, well, most of them are bad. Now, obviously, there are some regulations that you want. Okay, so like I gave the example of bans on chlorofluorocarbons, which are
Yeah,
these chemicals that were destroying the ozone layer, and that would have resulted in a big increase in cancer rates because the ozone layer is protecting us from ultraviolet radiation. Okay,
yeah,
so then after people figured that out, then they banned them basically around the world. So that was a good regulation, right? But probably the majority of regulations are overall bad. like they're imposing greater costs than their benefits. Okay, and it's hard to find studies of regulation in general. That studies of particular regulations usually find that the particular regulation was overall harmful.
Like occupational licensing.
Yeah, that's a good example. Like, yeah, so you should have to get a license in order to practice whatever profession, right? And there's just been an increase over the last whatever 50 years of people needing licenses for different professions. And the main effect of this is to raise prices. The
Yes.
real reason why they do this is because the people in the industry want to prevent new people from entering the industry because they want the prices to go up. They want to make it harder for people to compete with them. So they want to create barriers to entry, right? And usually when they add licensing requirements, the people who are already in the industry are grandfathered in. So they don't have to do anything to be allowed to continue, but new people who want to start have to do something. Okay. So that's the real reason why we have this. There's not really any evidence that it increases quality, right? So
Not at all. I
there have been
don't. I don't know. Maybe you would have seen him, but I've read Maurice Kleiner. He's one of the experts on the topic.
yeah.
And did you read Maurice?
I'm not sure. So I
Okay.
don't remember the names of the people I
Obviously,
mentioned in
you
the book.
don't have to, but yeah,
If
Maurice
it's
is one
not
of
cited, then
the,
I didn't read it.
yeah, and that's what Maurice said too.
Yeah. So overall, so like I referred to this study that was done by the Obama administration by his economic advisors. It basically said, well, overall studies don't find that licensing improves quality. And you might be surprised by that because, like, don't the licensing requirements eliminate incompetent people? And so, yes, they will eliminate some incompetent people, but they also reduce the competition, right? So they make it easier for low quality providers who are already in the industry to continue, right? And competition tends to increase quality. So, like, if people can easily enter, then there's going to be this market pressure to do better because you have to compete with all of these people who are trying to enter the industry.
Yes, and yet the total impact of 2% points of growth over the course of several decades is enormous. The authors conclude federal regulations added over the past 50 years have reduced real output growth by 2 percentage points on average over the period 1949 to 2005.
Yeah. So now, they said something about like how high the GDP would
Dawson
be.
and Seater, that's from Dawson and Seater.
Yeah. So there's an economic study of the overall effects of regulation. Then there's something where they said like what our GDP would be, like 50 trillion or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it would be much larger if regulation had remained at the 1950 level. Now, I added a footnote that said like that is probably an overestimate, right? Because like,
Yes.
so probably the 2 percentage points wouldn't have been constant. Like maybe it's 2 percentage points, like at the current margins, but like over time, the growth probably would have reduced. Okay, but anyway, like, yeah, overall, it appears that regulation slows economic growth, and that's really kind of the dominant effect. Because like if you slow economic growth and you keep doing that for decades, that just has a huge overall impact.
You end up like Europe. You end up like Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and
Like,
they.
this place with so much human capital, but at the same time, the growth rates are unimpressive, and people have to wonder: is this the first region of the world that first modernized? Is it? We don't know. Again, look at Europe today.
Yeah. Well, so like, yeah, I was going to say like, well, America is the richest country in the world, partly because we tend to have more freedom and less government intervention. But actually, we have a lot of regulation and it's been growing. So, like, if we want to increase the economic growth rate, we need to scale back the regulation.
Yes,
Basically, and,
It-
like
but
the
that's
leftists,
difficult.
like they don't comprehend this because they think like, oh, but regulation is there to protect us, right? But it's like, no, you've forgotten your theory of human nature when you think about the government. Like, you only think that business people are greedy, but no, like people in government are also selfish. And so what's going to happen is that um, people in business are going to try to take over. They're going to try to control the regulatory industries, right? And this in fact happens. I'm not just making this up. Like people who used to be in the industry or who plan to be in the industry usually get into these regulatory agencies. So what are they going to do? They're going to like try to make regulations that favor their company over other companies. They're not going to try to make regulations to favor the consumer. Why would they do that?
They're
Right?
lobbyists. They're lobbying. They're lobbyists.
Yeah, there are a lot of lobbyists who try to like influence legislation, right? But then like the regulators themselves are like often just members of the industry. And right. And you're like, oh, well, like we'll just like get some good altruistic people in there. But no, like there's no incentive.
Mm-mm.
There's no incentive for the people in the regulatory industries to be efficient or to help consumers. Because like if they do, nobody's going to notice that that happened. And like most people have no idea what the regulations are. They don't know about all of the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of regulations that are costing them like a few dollars a year.
And they wouldn't care. The logic of collective action.
Yeah.
Big fish
When you
versus
do
small
find
fish.
out, there's nothing that you can do about it, right? Because like your probability of actually changing a regulation is next to zero.
Now we're going to talk about the global warming consensus. Almost all scientists agree that humans are the main cause of global warming. 97%. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing, right? And then it turns out that well, that's not actually true. so that so yeah, the 97% statistic is commonly quoted, but it comes from a study that did not in fact survey scientists. It looked at abstracts of papers that were published, and it sort of like it had people like read the abstracts to see if the abstract indicated that the authors thought that global warming was real and partly man-made. Okay, but most of the abstracts actually did not apparently take any position on anthropogenic climate change. But what they did was they just ignored all of those. So just like remove all the ones that don't take a position. And now among the ones that do take a position, like 97% of the abstracts appear to be pro man-made global warming. And now why this is problematic is partly because, well, if suppose that there are some scientists who don't know whether climate change is man-made or not, then they probably wouldn't take a position in their abstracts. Right. So like just excluding all the abstracts that don't take a position is not a good way of estimating how many people were unsure. Right. In the same year that they published that study, there was an actual survey of members of the American Meteorological Society in which it was something like half of the members thought that there was man-made climate change. You probably have the statistics in front of you in the book.
Yes, 66% of abstracts express no opinion on the causes of climate change.
Yeah.
And you said something else about half. Repeat what you just said.
There was a survey from the American Meteorological Society.
Okay.
Let's see if we can find that. The global warming consensus. Did I have that in here? Oh, okay. Yeah. So the people who said that global warming is mostly man-made was 52% of the respondents, 71% of the climate specialists. So it's more if you just focus on climate specialists. Okay. But so that's not 97%. Like that's a big distance from 97%. By the way, the other people were not people who said that it wasn't man-made. They were mostly people who were unsure, right, or thought it was a combination of factors. So.
All right. No, this is the funny part of the interview. The world coming to an end in 12 years? Yes, the world is coming to an end in 12 years, and we should believe this because a mentally unstable girl with no education in physics said so.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, Greta Thunberg. I don't know if she's unstable, but
She is.
something
She
like
had selective mutism. She is unstable. That's why
she's
she's switching. That's why she switched from climate alarmism to anti-Semitism.
well, those are both bad. I guess global warming is bad and anti-Semitism is bad. So like, yeah, she should be against both of them. Okay, but yeah, something. So around 2018, the IPCC. So this is like this big climate-oriented organization, international organization. They published a report that said that we would have to take drastic action by the year 2030, so in 12 years from the time of the report, in order to prevent climate change from increasing above 1.5 degrees Celsius relative to pre-industrial times. And at the time, we were already at 1.0 degrees Celsius, okay? So we would have to take action within 12 years to prevent another half degree of warming. They did not say that the failure to do so would destroy our civilization either then or ever. And they have never said that. They've never predicted an end of civilization or an end to the species or the end of life on Earth or anything insane and ridiculous like that, because they're not insane like or lying political activists.
Like AOC.
Yeah. And then AOC quoted this thing, the 12 years. Oh, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't do something about climate change. And there's simply no basis for that. The IPCC never said that, and like almost no scientists think that it's an existential risk.
This is what Michael Mann, who's a leading climate alarmist, this is what he said. There is no evidence of climate change scenarios that would render human beings extinct.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And this is interesting because like this guy is like, he's like the climate alarmist. He's the author of the famous hockey stick graph. You know what that is, okay?
Yes.
No, I'm not quoting these climate skeptics, all right? These scientists who are responsible for the whole climate alarmism, they're saying it's not an existential threat, right? But then there's like some huge percentage of the general public who thinks that it is an existential threat. And they think that because they think that they're listening to the science. And like they're not, they're listening to political activists.
Exactly. Now tell us about the counter-intellectual Bjorn Lomborg.
Yeah. Oh, well, so he tried to figure out, he has this big project of trying to figure out like what we should prioritize in terms of global problems, right? And like, what are the best solutions to global problems? All right. So he collects evidence about global problems, including global warming, malaria, whatever, hunger, and, other global problems like that. And then like he collects evidence about, from experts about possible solutions and how much they would cost and how much good they would do. And then like he got together this group of economists to try to just reviewing the evidence from the experts, right? To figure out what were the top priorities. Like if you have $100 billion, what should you spend it on, right? And it just turns out that global warming is like a low priority. It's like, it's not in the top 10 of what you should spend money on in terms of cost effectiveness. And the reason for this is not that they don't believe in global warming. It's that it's super expensive to make a tiny change. Like you have to spend like, trillions of dollars to just delay global warming, by like a decade or whatever. Okay. Meanwhile, there are other problems that are killing and will continue to kill a lot more people, and we have excellent solutions to them. Right. So like I mentioned malaria, because that's one of the things that there is a great counter to, which is insecticide treated bed nets. Okay. Because malaria is spread by mosquitoes. And it just turned out that if you look at, well, how much it costs and how many lives you expect to save, it's like way better than working on global warming. So it's not that global warming isn't real. It's just that like the amount of money that it would take to stop it, you can't stop it, but the amount of money it takes to slow it down could be spent in a lot better ways.
Yes, he has a recent study saying that the Paris Agreement wasn't really worth it. I can't remember the figure that he quoted, but he said 1 cent. I can't remember the figure, but he was saying that countries that signed on, like America, for example, their benefits were super marginal.
Yeah.
Like 8 cents of the dollar, something like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you mean that he was saying it was overall more cost than benefit?
Yeah, yes. The benefits are really marginal.
Yeah. I mean, that's not surprising, right? Like, because, I mean, burning carbon is kind of essential to Western civilization.
It is.
Like, I'm sorry, but
CO2 is good for agricultural fertilization.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that brings up another thing, which is that the people who worry about climate change, they usually don't think about potential benefits.
Not
Right.
at
So
all.
there are costs that's real, but there are also benefits.
Like warming leads to greening, and greening modulates warming.
Oh yeah, yeah. So there could be like a negative feedback. But like okay, so some of the deaths that people are projecting from global warming are deaths due to heat. Like more people will get heat stroke and die. But the people who are worrying about this often forget that there are a lot more deaths due to cold every year worldwide than there are due to heat. So those will decrease. So it's like it's not implausible that there could be an overall improvement. There could be fewer deaths overall, more heat deaths, but a lot fewer.
Climate change has been good for biodiversity. If the climate is changing, it can get cooler or hotter. It's getting hotter, and that has been positive for biodiversity.
Maybe.
Yeah,
So I haven't looked at that, but like
Chris Thomas, he wrote a book. His name is Chris Thomas. Yes,
yeah. So like it's you should think it is plausible. Like it would be a weird coincidence if the absolute optimal temperature for the planet to be happened to be where it already is, right? Or where it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Like that would be a weird coincidence. The optimal temperature could be either higher or lower, but just a priori, there's about a 50% chance that the optimal temperature is higher. So if you increase it a little bit, you'd be making things better.
it
And
could be
then if you
4 degrees Celsius. I don't know. It could be 4 degrees Celsius. I don't know.
yeah, like obviously there's some amount of warming at which then it gets worse, right? But if it goes up 4 degrees Celsius, like is that going to be better or worse for life? I don't know. There's a lot of places in the world that are sort of uninhabitable where there's very little life because it's too cold,
Yes,
and there are places where it's uninhabitable because it's too hot,
yes,
right? But like so, if we make things warmer, maybe there will be more life overall. Like hard to say, right? But we shouldn't only count the costs and not count the benefits.
exactly. Now we're going to talk about mask science. So,
Yeah,
Michael, I like to be analytical. So before I comment on any topic, I do research, real research. Newspapers are not research. I prefer journals. So these days I read mostly journals. So I
yeah.
read some studies that refuted the efficacy of face masks. One was a review from Oxford, and I wrote a letter to the editor. This was over 2 years ago. It was published in a Jamaican newspaper. And this idiotic woman, she sent me an email saying, "You're effing stupid and irresponsible because a mask is better than no mask." So, being the condescending person that I am, I sent her an email with her own words. I don't need her shit. So I sent it back to her.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, you might think like I've told some people that, well, these things probably don't do anything. And then people were like, well, it's got to do a little bit, right? It's got to at
Yeah,
least
wearing
do
a
that.
mask is better than no mask. That's not an
But
argument.
yeah, but that's not obvious actually when you think about it. And actually, so at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, some of the world experts, some of the same people who later said that you need a mask were saying that you don't need a mask. And they were saying actually that it could be harmful. And like, how could it be harmful? Well, um, when people put on the mask and then like they touch the mask periodically during the day, like they're adjusting it. And especially with these cloth masks, they use it over and over again. And so what happens is the mask can accumulate germs in it. Right. And then, they touch the mask and then they touch their face. And so like you could be increasing your risk of disease. There was actually a study that found that.
Sevenfold increase from
Yeah.
McIntyre et al. 2015.
Yeah, yeah. That the cloth masks in particular cause a big increase in your risk of getting sick. Right? So, like, that might be counterintuitive, but when you think about it, that does kind of make sense that could happen. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, actually, there were a lot of people wearing cloth masks. And so, and then, the benefit that's alleged or appears to be the case for the surgical masks is much smaller, right? So like it might be a 5% reduction in your risk compared to a sevenfold increase. So actually the mask mandates probably made things worse overall. They probably increased the spread of the disease.
Yeah, yes. And in the public space, the transmission is over 0%. So no, masks were not needed.
Yeah, yeah. There was like whether it was needed in the first place, because like the pandemic wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be.
Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, it might have been counterproductive. So like, yeah. You definitely don't need things that are counterproductive.
Not at all. So yeah, so we're wrapping up now, and as I said, w- we discuss all the myths except for the myths about individuals. So Eric, Amy Cooper, George Floyd, all of those people, those cases were rushed by the media. But if you want, you can talk about Amy Cooper.
Yeah. So yeah, we got to wrap up soon here, but yeah. Well, Amy Cooper was the so-called Central Park Karen.
Yes.
So she was in Central Park in New York City, and then she had some I guess altercation with a black man. And so there's a thing that she was walking her dog without a leash, which you're not supposed to do. And like this black guy, whose name I've forgotten, Christian.
Christian Cooper.
Yeah. So no relation, even though they happen to have the same last name. Okay, and like he was a bird watcher, and he was mad at her for having her dog off the leash because the dogs like scare away birds or something. All right. So then they have some altercation, and then he films part of it, and then that went viral, and then like people just started attacking Amy Cooper because like she called the police on a black man. Right? So, like in the video, she's like calling the police and telling them that she's being threatened by a black man. And then everybody was like, "Oh, she's a racist," and like she's trying to get him shot and killed or something like that.
No, he was a nuisance. The Christian guy was being a nuisance. If he
Yeah.
was so bothered by her dog not being on the leash, he should have reported it to the park ranger. What did he do? He proceeded to videotape her.
Yeah. So like she told the police that Christian Cooper threatened her. And then what went around on social media was people on social media were saying, "Oh, she was just lying to get the police to attack Christian Cooper." But actually, no, he did threaten her, right? He said something like, "Oh, you're going to do what you want to do, then I'm going to do what I want to do, but you're not going to like it."
Yes.
Okay. And so this is just like this vague general threat. And like you're a woman alone in a park where there are no other people around being threatened by a man who's much bigger than you. And giving this vague threat where you have no idea what he means by that. Like it's not irrational to call the police at that point, right? This is not like some racist thing. Like you actually should be afraid at that point. And you should call the cops. That's the smart thing to do. And then you should give a physical description of the suspect.
Exactly, and he's black and tall.
Sorry.
He's black and tall. That's what she knows.
Yeah.
And
So
seeing
like
that the
yeah,
man
she was
is
like he's a
dark,
black
that's,
man,
that's
and
impressive.
so and she said this a few times, and then people were like, "Oh, why does she keep saying he's black?" The reason is you couldn't hear what was going on the other end, but what was coming from the other end was the dispatcher couldn't hear her, so she had to repeat herself. And the reason why she starts getting increasingly upset is that the dispatcher keeps not hearing what she's saying.
Yes.
Right. So like that's the rest of the context, right?
Yeah. So and again, so I Brian Kaplan was a guest on the show some time ago. He wrote a comment on your book, and Arnold Kling also wrote a review somewhat. And well, Brian Kaplan is going to interview. That's what he said,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
both said that they wanted to hear you talk about IQ.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't do research on IQ really. So all I know is there are differences in the IQ scores across races, as
Yeah.
well as standardized tests like the SAT, which are about one standard deviation between white and black scores.
Yeah, but for me, like this book, it's a good book. I like it, and that's why I did a review. But I think that many of the myths that are discussed in this book they need to be discussed because people don't know that they're untrue. But these myths are also popular, and when you write your second book, like a second edition, I
Yeah.
want you to write about cultural differences in personality. That's really important. Not
Hmm.
just IQ differences, but cultural differences in personality, sex differences in intelligence, and the paucity of women in science.
Yeah.
And you can also write on colonialism and why it wasn't really that bad when you compare it to non-Western versions.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that much about all those things. The myths
You're a
that I
smart
pick.
guy and you read a lot. You're smart and you read a lot, so you can learn.
Yeah, I can do that, but like the myths that I put in the book, I wanted them to be things where like it's just clear, it's just clear that the thing is false, right? And like, the people who say, oh, maybe colonialism was beneficial overall, like I wouldn't say, oh, that's an established objective fact, right? Like that's kind of an opinion. And I wanted the chapters to be things where somebody says P, and that's
Okay.
just
All
definitely
right.
false.
Yes. Very, very. And the on this, if you write when you write your second book, you can talk more about the benefits of climate change.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I'm
can,
telling you, I'm telling you to write a second book.
yeah, yeah. I can see if this one does really well, maybe there will be a second
All
version.
right. So yeah. So speaking to you has been good, and I'm sure that you observed that during the conversation we discuss the myths and the studies. I am not the type of person to interview somebody and say, okay, let's talk about wokeism, and they just say Americans are woke, and they talk about wokeism without saying anything, or they say, let's
Mm.
talk about George Floyd, and they spend all this time on George Floyd and Michael Brown. I can't bother. I can't bother with that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I
Excellent. Yeah. So good that you didn't focus on just one case, and good that
yeah,
you
exactly. I
didn't.
chose the more substantive issue. Like some people just like it's like interviewing Charles Murray and saying to Charles, is their research political? And you spend the entire time talking about how people respond to research. Talk about what's in the research.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But yes, but bye. We have been speaking for some time. But bye, Michael.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Good talking to you.